That brings us to item number 18, which is our textbook adoptions for 16-17, shown in Exhibit G.
Dr. Milton.
Chairman Gant, board members, Dr. Hefner, this is comparable with what we just passed for Exhibit F. We're looking at the fiscal year 2016-17. We have an extensive list of recommendations to you of 15 different titles in various content areas. I'm fortunate to have with me tonight behind me Beth Bolin, our coordinator of science, health, and physical education. Beth, if you would wave. And beside her is Melanie Sanford, our coordinator of social studies, both of which have been instrumental with this particular 15 titles that we're bringing to you. We have been in compliance with district policy inclusive of parents, of teachers, and also community members. We've made sure that the things that we've looked at and recommended to you, particularly the style Roman numeral 3 on your exhibits and Roman numeral 5 instructional supplements, we were very intentional with that to make sure the things that we are choosing are in alignment with state assessments and also in places where AP is involved, national assessments as well. Keeping in mind career and college readiness standards and also the instructional needs of our students. So those areas will certainly answer any questions that you have. If you have any questions about specific recommendations that we have for you, either Ms. Bolin or Ms. Sanford can assist you with finding those answers if I'm not able to do that. So Mr. Gant.
Ms. Hammond.
Mine's just a general, not specific to one subject, but do all of our, if we have workbooks within it, like I know, say with social studies, we have workbooks in science, are all of those also online? Mm-hmm. If students don't want to have to take the books home? I'm assuming they all are, but we have some of ours that don't, maybe the book's online, but not the workbook.
Right.
So I just thought I'd see if the kids all have access to that.
It's going to be dependent on the publisher, Ms. Hammond. That's
so
a great
there are
question.
some that
so
don't.
There are some with, and workbooks are considered consumables. We make sure that whatever we purchase, and never recommend to you all that we have the funds to supplement and make sure that we have the state funds to supplement so we can continue that. So we do have a compromise. If you notice instructional strategies, Roman numeral 5, you'll see a lot about instructional technology, instruments and devices and resources, those kinds of things, but we still do make sure that we offer either the choice of the consumable product or the online accessibility.
Good, because that's really important to kids
Absolutely.
Today. Thank you.
Dr. Melton, just to follow up to that, we probably have that same option now with our current textbooks. Do you know a percentage of people that opt to use the technology piece of that versus the heavy book in the book bag?
It's going to depend on the teacher preference and the content area. If you have something mathematical, you can assure that most teachers need to use a paper and pencil and make it more consumable oriented. If it's something that's more of a social studies mindset with maps, you want to make sure that you have consumable for that. If you're looking at something for ELA, that may be more accessible to do more online with technology so that kids can learn to do coding and highlighting using those devices that we're providing to them through their instructional program. So it's just going to depend on the teacher, the content,
right.
and most importantly, the lesson being taught for that particular unit. That's going to make some decisions for the teachers.
And I understand the teacher and the content. Are we seeing our students who are growing up in this very alive technical world opting to use the technology that they're used to, where I might not want to read a book online, they love to read a book online or whatever?
You'll notice many of our students would prefer using a phone because it's a smaller device that they can handle very easily, whereas you and I may struggle with an iPad. They can use a phone just as easily as we can use a larger device. They are certainly proficient.
Right. And I know everybody at this table still shares and sees and hears the issue with our students having these large book bags, especially when they're in elementary school.
Right.
And I have a granddaughter that does that way beyond where it needs to be. And a lot of things in there don't need to be in there.
That's true.
But some of them are very heavy, kind of big books. So we see a trend there that's maybe going to help out some young backs not getting hurt. Because we've been talking about it ever since I've been on this board. It's just
You're always going to have your sixth grader who is afraid to go to their locker because they may not be able to open it. You're always going to have your student who wants to have everything accessible because they just may need it when they get home. So you can see there's a change, but you're never going to see that completely go away, unfortunately. I do encourage parents to talk with their child and help them decide what can be left at school. You never bring this out of your book bag, so it's okay to leave it at school, to make sure that students are making those decisions, such as the Corley kids talked about tonight. That's one of those habits we need to start creating in children in the younger age.
my last question. Is there a very strong effort by the people that publish and sell books to keep us handling books? You can just say yes or no, be fine.
May I plead the fifth on that?
You can. I know where we are.
Publishing is a big business. Obviously, it's very profitable, and But I will say, with our choices that we brought to you for your recommendations, all these have gone through review at the state level. So the things that we have looked at, the department first went through to preview, and then we've looked at it and then made the local decision here, which I'm very proud to say the time and the effort, energy our teachers, our coordinators, and our parents have put in this has been tremendous.
Right. Well, thank you very much. You didn't ask me yes or no, and that's great. That's good.
I tried to
Ms.
avoid
Hammond,
that,
you're
so
up.
I'm glad.
This is quickly, but to me, it goes along with the book, the textbooks. Do our students, and it may vary with schools, do all of our high school kids, do they have the tablet? Do
Our
they all
iPad-
have,
our
or
iPads are
they have
used
the
in our
iPad?
high
Well, we have
schools.
tablets. They have the iPad.
We have iPads in 9 through 12. We have Chromebooks at the middle level.
Okay, I knew-
And intermediate. So Crossroads, Chapin Intermediate, and all of our middle schools have Chromebooks. Those students, we do offer choice, of course. Some students prefer to use their own device. If you remember Mr. Bounds and technology, along with Ms. Richardson, we did some trademarking of DATS. Mr. Bounds may have to help fill in the blank for that. I remember DATS, but I can't remember the device adaptable technology system. I was 50%
Well, a lot
on
of
that.
kids, when Mr. Gant was talking about technology, a lot of kids in my class will prefer, they even take their notes on there.
Sure.
You know, they do all of that electronically. And, you know, and so that was really important to me that most of the people you deal with when we buy our books, that it is online, because a lot of them, that is how they want to do everything. Send me, you know, they can send me their homework through.
We do, but we
So,
still
yeah.
have some parents who opt not to
Yeah,
allow their
we
student to
do
accept a
both.
device. We want to make sure that we're respectful of that choice as well, so the parent and the student can make the decision that's best for them.
I'm happy.
Okay, any other discussion? Thank you very much. Thank you for guiding us through this process. That brings us to item 19, which is shown in Exhibit H, and I believe Dr. Jakes, you're going to help us with this.
Yes.
Said that wrong.
So we do have
Jakes.
4 exhibits, and these are changes in policy, and 2 are actually paired together. I'll begin with Exhibit H, which is GDJ, and that's support staff assignments and transfers. And these revisions are actually parallel to Exhibit J, which is GCK and GCKR, professional staff assignments and transfers. Basically, when you look at these revisions, what we're doing is changing the voluntary and involuntary to a request for transfer or a reassignment. And this does clean up the language, would make the two policies parallel. And it does remove the RIF-style language, which sets up a number of parameters that have to be visited anytime there is a budget cut or a reduction in staffing, and truly puts the emphasis on the best interest of the district.
Any questions? Go ahead. Just,
yes.
we'll just let you.
Sure.
Anybody have anything? Well, I believe that, are you getting ready to talk about the one that's in Exhibit I?
Yes, sir.
And I believe that's the one that we had some public participation concern. If
Yeah.
you'll help us see the light in there, we'd appreciate it.
Correct. Next is I. And the first thing that you have in your exhibit is the policy as it currently exists. And you'll see it's very short. And the proposed amendment is actually more detailed. It provides additional guidance. One of the apparent changes is the establishment of paid and unpaid leave. The previous policy was silent on that. And it also addresses, very importantly, towards the end of the policy, criminal charges, which we're finding more and more is something that we need to take into account. These changes are recommended by legal counsel, and they certainly would put us in the company of other districts across the state. And the recommended language is to spell out the additional information instead of having the very vague policy that existed before. You asked me to expand perhaps on comment or to talk a little bit about that. What we do know is that in any employment decision, anytime we're looking at the termination of employment, that's never going to be arbitrary or capricious. We're always going to have our federal standards, our federal laws and expectations that we're responsible for adhering to. We're always going to have due process. Never would we dismiss someone without cause. So due process is a part of that, and we actually do a better job in the new policy of spelling out what that looks like. The superintendent is a part of that process. There is a pre-termination opportunity that's spelled out that would exist. So from my perspective, it actually does more to talk about the process and what the rights would be for the employee as opposed to having a very short silent statement as we had earlier. So I recommend that, that we do respond to advice from our legal counsel and bring our policy into line with others across the state.
You want to go to item 21, item J,
Okay.
Exhibit J?
Mr. Gant, have we gotten to the discipline, suspension, and dismissal? Yep. Or are you still on the other one?
I think that's one, we were just talking, we hadn't left it, though. You want to talk about it?
No, well, no, I mean, I thought well, I have some questions on the one that the speaker
Right.
is on.
And I believe that's the one we were just talking about.
Okay,
Still
then
talking
I'm
about
on the right. I was afraid,
Yeah,
I was,
no, you're
I was
good.
ahead of you, I'm sorry. I was reading. I just have a question. Because if I heard the speaker correctly, and he speaks for staff as well as teachers, but it seems like it was just a list of things that someone could get fired for. I realize we need this, and I'm glad you have to have this in writing as to what it is, but I would like to ask the question. A lot of these to me are totally very obvious, but I think sometimes when I look at the one on harassment, intimidation, or bullying, and I know the definitions of them as because I have to look for them in my setting of the classroom. But I would like to know the process if a support staff was accused of one of those. I'd like for the public to know how we as a district go about validating that and what rights they do have, because I'll tell you, bullying has to happen over and over, but intimidation and harassment can sometimes be seen. Harassment can be seen as in the eyes of one person and not another. And I think that this is probably something very scary to an employee, whereas these others are, just obvious if you did them wrong. Insubordination, or you abandon your job, or neglect of duty, drunkenness, gross immorality. And these things are just on, But that one, I'd like to do a little bit of explaining from the district, from our superintendent and from Dr. Jakes, how we go about that process.
Absolutely.
To
define it and to know that when you do your investigation, it's been seen by both sides.
We have a spectrum of consequences for inappropriateness, and they can range from an informal reprimand to a reprimand to a suspension, and of course, ultimately could lead to termination. But termination is always the last possible resort to any allegation. I use the word allegation because anytime a charge is raised, it is an allegation until the investigation is conducted and we either confirm that indeed the alleged behavior did exist and we're able to reach that conclusion, or we realize that in fact it was an allegation. We have not been able to substantiate that. We cannot support that. So there is quite a defined process that takes place. And the last consequence would be a recommendation for termination. What I do like about this policy is that that recommendation would be made to the superintendent. It almost gives another step to protect employees, to ensure that they do have that audience, that they have the opportunity to appeal that decision to the superintendent, and of course would be a very serious undertaking. This would not simply be a disciplinary policy. That would be a last result.
We'll say on harassment, if it's he said, she said, or he said, and you have no, as you investigated, and it is just how do you, who's your jury? You and Dr. Hefner?
So absolutely, any type of high high-stakes consequential decision, especially one involving employee, we would need to have evidence. We would
Okay.
need to be able to demonstrate beyond the shadow of a
Someone
doubt.
saw that and heard, or the person said, yes, I did.
Absolutely. Principals are involved in, oftentimes in those investigations at the primary level. Of course, I'm involved. We carry out investigations. Ultimately, Dr. Hefner would review that, and we would have consensus at each of those points in order to reach that decision.
Thank you.
I would just add that our goal is, for us to support our employees, and we don't hire them to dismiss them. Any recommendation or any dismissal is something that's weighed very heavily, and we understand, as Dr. Jake said at the very beginning, people never give up their rights under federal and state law. So it has to be very well-documented evidence. And again, the areas you talk about, the area you talk about in terms of harassment, we understand sometimes that's not as clear-cut as
Right, well, that's what I
public
understand,
drunkenness.
the clear cut. I mean, there's no question about it, but I understand, and I think bullying can be easy, it has to be a pattern, but intimidation and harassment can be interpreted differently. And I just want to be sure they're protected.
Absolutely.
Jake, you mentioned a minute ago that the attorneys, I assume we got most of this from School Boards Association, and they're a lady that heads it up, I believe, is an attorney. I would like for you to just look at this criminal charges, last two paragraphs. To me, it seems like that wording, when I think of a resolution, it could be, a criminal charge could be resolved in a positive or a negative way. And this seems to be worded in such a way you would think if it was resolved positive, there still could be disciplinary actions, and I guess there could. But that would seem to be, that's sort of a tenet of our country, innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely.
But I'm just going to ask you to look at that, maybe with the attorney for the School Board Association, see if there's any way to write that it didn't have the same meaning as I read it. It just sort of comes back as saying it may resolve in your favor, but there still may be consequence, and there may be cases where that would happen, but it just seems to be it needs a little something there for. Would you mind just looking at that?
I'm happy to do that.
That'd be great. All right, any other questions on this particular policy? That will take us to policy J. We hadn't gotten to that one on transfers. Okay.
And J is that parallel policy to support. This speaks specifically about professional staff. And again, it focuses on the needs of the district. And so we replace the language with the best interest of the district. And also the administrative rule would be revised along with that.
Any questions there? And we're in discussions, so we'll have a chance for readings on this coming up too. Anybody? Okay. That'll bring us to policy exhibit K, assignment transfer.
And K is simply a deletion, and this is assignment and transfer of building administrators with the idea that this is covered under the professional staff assignments and transfers. GCK actually takes this into account, so it's a bit redundant. And so there truly isn't a need for a separate policy, so this is more housekeeping. Should you approve the revisions, this policy would not be necessary. I do want to clarify, though, when we talk about employee rights, which are very important, administrators may still file a grievance. This simply would not guarantee a hearing, so that the administrator would still have the opportunity to file a grievance if they disagreed with the placement.
Any question? Sam?
The grievance, I guess I was under the understanding that any staff member can always ask for a grievance. They can file a grievance. Is that any employee? Dr.
Any employee
Jakes?
can file a grievance. I think under your policy,
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
not everybody is entitled to a hearing before the board. Not all of them are guaranteed to go all the way up. In the case of a and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Dr. Jakes, in the case of a continuing contract teacher, they have certainly very great employment appeal rights. And not every single category of employee may have all of those same rights, but the continuing contract teacher does.
Does, okay. But not support staff. They don't.
Thank you, Dr. Jakes.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item number 23. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Bumgardner.
Mr. Gant, I move that we adjourn.
Have a second, Mr. White. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you all for coming tonight.